Are the Saints destined to acquire one of the Browns' veteran quarterbacks? And what is the market like for Chris Olave, if there even is one? We'll find out from Ross Jackson right now on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast. I'm proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. Excited to be joined today by Ross Jackson, who is the host of Locked On Saints here on the network, to provide some insight into the availability of Chris Olave via trade and whether or not the Saints may be picking up the phone and calling the Browns about one of their veteran quarterbacks. First, though, I do want to thank you for being an everydayer at the Locked On Browns podcast and making us your first listen every single day. Remember, you can find Cleveland Browns content with Locked On Browns every week, Monday through Friday, guaranteed, with bonus content on some weekends, and it's totally free to you. Just make sure you hit that subscribe button to make us your first listen every day. And of course, you can check out the Locked On Browns YouTube channel, where you can also get involved in the show, share your thoughts on anything we discuss in the comments section. This is your team, so be part of the conversation every single day. And Ross, I'm excited to have you be part of the conversation today because the Browns have a lot of questions that they're looking to answer at a number of different positions. The first one being quarterback. And what I think is interesting about the state of both of our teams are that they're both in very similar situations when it comes to the quarterback position. Open competitions that they're sort of hosting here in the summer months to prepare for next year. And I guess I'm curious from your perspective, with the Saints room especially skewing younger after Derek Carr just retired, what do you think their appetite is for potentially looking to add a veteran to their room at some point before the season gets rolling?
Yeah, I think I would call it, Spencer, remains to be seen what their appetite is. I think what they're telling us right now, and when we spoke to them, the Saints, they do this Hall of Fame, this annual Hall of Fame celebrity golf classic that they do every year. And we get 8 minutes with the coach and the GM during that time and everything. You know how those types of things go. And when we talk to them, they'll tell you, look, they feel like their veteran quarterbacks are on the coaching staff. Kellen Moore, head coach, former NFL quarterback. Doug Nussmeier, offensive coordinator, former NFL quarterback. Scott Tolzien, of course, quarterbacks coach, former NFL quarterback. And then there's also Scott Linehan also on the staff as well. And so they feel like the coaching staff provides and makes up for the inexperience of the room. But I don't know, man, 7 starts in total amongst this entire team, amongst quarterbacks. With 4 quarterbacks on the roster, mind you, and no wins. To me, that feels like a place where you probably want a veteran quarterback in the building. And so I would say it remains to be seen in that right now they're saying, hey, we don't feel like we need it. But if they get in the training camp, get through training camp, through the preseason, whatever, and feel like, maybe we could use that veteran, then that's where I could see them absolutely developing an appetite for that player.
So what is interesting with the Browns on this is their room being made up of right now 4 different quarterbacks. I know people like to say 5 because Deshaun's there, but my read on that, if anyone who's listened to this podcast knows, I don't think Deshaun's playing another snap for this team. I know there was some fanfare this week with his Instagram videos and he doesn't have the boot on anymore, but it's whatever. I don't think he's going to play another snap for this team, but maybe I'll be proven wrong. Regardless, you have the 4 guys. 2 of them are veterans. One is a guy deep in his career, obviously in the limelight of his career, who has some experience in Cleveland. The other, a former first-round pick who is kind of looking to revive his career, and then the 2 rookies. And the Browns generally do carry 4 quarterbacks this time of year, so that's not abnormal. But at some point, they are going to have to move on from one of these guys if they're going to make it, get to the regular season. I don't see them carrying 4 when the regular season begins. So as you sort of assess the Browns' room, do you think a deal with Cleveland is one that would make some sense if the Saints get to a point where they're like, hey, you know what? We do need a veteran. Let's give Cleveland a call.
Yeah, I think it requires that, right? It requires them feeling that they need that veteran, and it requires them feeling strongly enough about somebody in that quarterback room that they don't want to risk that player going to the open market, and instead they want to give up an asset to ensure that they get that player. And that asset can be 2025 or 2026, rather. That asset can be 2027, whatever it's going to be. I do think that that's possible. And the player in particular, if I may, that I think that's most possible with is Kenny Pickett, because he's the guy that has the connection to Kellen Moore. He's the guy that has worked with Kellen Moore before. And he's the guy that has won with Kellen Moore before. Now, it was a game, don't get me wrong, but he's the guy. He's one of those guys that's the Justin Herbert, non-Dak Prescott, non-Jalen Hurts quarterback that Kellen Moore has won a game with. So I think that the connection there would make him probably the most desirable of that group to potentially make a trade for.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And the connection there that you bring up is we know that stuff matters in the NFL. Like relationships matter, where you were previously. It's why the Browns spent most of the offseason linked to Kirk Cousins, right? Because he has a relationship with Kevin Stefanski. So I agree with you that I think Kenny Pickett makes a lot of sense if that was to be the player they were pursuing. I'm interested, though, because the Browns are really talking up Kenny Pickett. He's the guy they traded for this offseason as they got a quarterback basically through all the avenues you can, the draft, a trade, free agency. So if the option was Joe Flacco instead, because I'm kind of the belief right now that the way they've talked about Kenny Pickett, I kind of feel like he could be the one that emerges as the starter at the start of the season, and then Flacco's the one they try to trade. So if that happens, does that mean the Saints probably would be out of the conversation, or do you think Flacco was something they would still potentially entertain?
I think Flacco makes less sense for them in terms of giving up an asset in a trade.
Yeah.
Could he make sense for them if he hits the open market? Sure. And yeah, you got to combat with other teams that might want him. But I think you would be more willing to take that risk for Joe Flacco than to give up an asset right now. This New Orleans Saints team is very much focused on getting younger for the first time in forever. They walked in with 9 selections in the NFL draft that actually used all 9 of those selections. We didn't see Mickey Loomis, the general manager, trade, which makes me wonder if he was like tied up in the draft room or something like that, because typically that's his MO, you know? And so he wasn't tied up in the draft room. We've seen the videos. We know he was safe. But you know, that shows you that they're worried about, they're effectively investing their assets right now with a rookie head coach, all new coaching staff in building a bit of a younger roster or building through the draft. And so I would be surprised to see them give up a draft asset for a quarterback that's 30 plus and in the twilight of their career, especially after everything that just happened with Derek Carr, which was not the most, let's call it, sensible departure in terms of how all of that played out. I think that they're very, very cognizant about how they're utilizing their assets, what they could do with those assets in terms of building for their future, and why they probably wouldn't want to spend those assets getting somebody that wouldn't be a part of their future, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's fair. I think Browns fans obviously understand as well. Flacco and starting Flacco and even bringing him back this year is kind of that bridge quarterback if he starts. Like, he's the guy that you just kind of like have here for a year to tread water for you until you pass the baton to a rookie, whether that's this year or whether that's they decide they need to draft into the one next year. I guess, Ross, this is more so just a Saints question directly, but I'm fascinated to watch how the Browns quarterback competition plays out. And Kevin Stefanski's been saying some things recently just about like how the reps are going to look and whatnot. From your perspective with New Orleans, which quarterback do you think has a leg up going into this competition that you get to get a chance to see?
The talk about the battle here in New Orleans. Yeah. I would say that the leg up goes to Tyler Shuck right now, who's the Louisville quarterback who was drafted in the second round. Look, it was the first time in the Saints franchise history that they've ever used a second round pick to draft a quarterback. It's the first time in over 50 years that they've used a first or second round pick in the NFL draft, excluding the supplemental draft, to draft a quarterback. The last time they did that was for Archie Manning in 1971. That worked out pretty well. And so it's been a long time. And so with that, you consider all that, and then you consider the fact that this is the first time under general manager Mickey Loomis that a head coach has come in and handpicked a quarterback in the NFL draft in his tenure. I think all signs just point to Tyler Shuck being the guy. I think Spencer Rattler still has a chance. The second-year quarterback here still has a chance. He started OTAs strong, but I think he's going to have to overperform or outperform Tyler Shuck because Ty's going to go to the runner, and I feel like the runner right now is Shuck. So I give him the edge.
Yeah, that's some interesting perspective. I think it's interesting too because like here in Cleveland, you have somebody in Flacco who's been here before, so I think there's an assumption like, oh, he has the leg up, right? Because he knows the offense. But what's interesting with New Orleans is like totally new regime. So it does feel like everyone's kind of on the same playing field in terms of like it's a clean slate, like let's just throw the balls out and let them play. So it'll be interesting to watch from afar how that one shakes out with the Browns here going through a very similar situation themselves. Ross is sticking around. I've got more questions for him this time regarding the availability of Chris Olave. We'll talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you can stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Take advantage of their all-in-one convenience. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. I can tell you that budgeting for things throughout the year is one of the biggest stressors in my household. As we try to afford a toddler, bills, planning family vacations, and getting work done around the house, it's a lot for any one couple to handle. But the beauty of Monarch Money is that it makes managing your money with your partner easier than ever. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Back at it here with Ross Jackson, Locked On Saints host here in the network. And we're going to pivot from the quarterback conversation, which I do think is a fascinating one for both these teams, as I said. But there was some interesting information that was brought up from Albert Breer this past week of Sports Illustrated, who shared that recently that the Browns at one point this offseason did actually call the New Orleans Saints and maybe field or present an offer to them for their top wide receiver, Chris Olave. We know wide receiver is a need for the Browns. I know this also follows some reporting that the Steelers have maybe reached out to the Saints about trying to acquire Chris Olave as well. What, if anything, Ross, do you know about the teams that have inquired about Olave at this point? Are there others? And how, like, what conversations are kind of being had on that front?
Yeah, I'm sure that there have been others. The only one that I can confirm, though, is Pittsburgh. It would not surprise me, though, if Cleveland is one of those teams. And look, this just goes to show you kind of the viewpoint of the New Orleans Saints from around the league in terms of where they are in their lifespan.
Yeah.
People believe that the New Orleans Saints could potentially start to kind of ship out assets because of the situation that they're in and where they are in the midst of their sort of rebuild or retool, whatever it is that NFL teams are okay with saying these days. Everybody hates rebuild, but like that's the situation that they're in, right? And so I think that it gives you a pretty good glimpse of where the NFL views New Orleans. But I can confirm the Pittsburgh one for sure. I would not be shocked about Cleveland calling, however.
So along those lines, what is the actual availability of Chris Olave? Because this is the thing that I think, you mentioned the phrase rebuild. It can be sort of like a very triggering term in NFL circles. Teams don't like to say it. But if where teams might be from the outside looking and saying, hey, the Saints are in a rebuild, maybe they are going to ship off assets. But it also takes the Saints being in agreement with that and understanding like this is where we're at in our life cycle. Do they believe that trading Chris Olave is something that they want to entertain or something that is on the table for them?
I don't think so at this time. I think, though, that like if the Saints get to a point by the trade deadline where things haven't come together for them, and look, this isn't going to be a competitive team in 2025 in terms of being a playoff team or anything like that. They're probably not going to win their division. But, if they've gotten to the trade deadline or up close to the trade deadline and they're sitting on 1 or 2 wins, then maybe that signals or changes the way that they're looking at themselves. Maybe that changes the way that Chris Olave is looking at the projection of the team too. Like we have to keep that in mind as well. And so I think that that's kind of what it would take at this point to get to that point. As of right now, I think that they do see themselves as a competitive team. I think they see themselves as a team that can compete within their division. They just kind of feel like they have to improve the offensive line, keep the roster healthy, and pick the right quarterback. But I'm going to be honest with you, if offensive line, quarterback, and health are your issues, you're probably not in the greatest point in your life cycle, right? But that's the way but they look at it from a different perspective because that's what NFL teams do, right? They're going to look at it from a perspective of optimism. And so I think that right now they consider themselves with a Chris Olave competitive, probably consider themselves without a Chris Olave a little bit less competitive because of what the rest of that wide receiver room is. And so I could see why they're looking to at least hold on to him right now, but maybe that changes over the course of time.
Selling hope and optimism is the calling card of the Cleveland Browns for years. It has been their business model for a long, long time, Ross. So we're very familiar with it. We always throw out the phrase, everybody has a price, right? So right now you're saying Saints probably not likely to move off of him. They, feel like he keeps them competitive. I know you did an episode on this already yourself, and I know you talked about how he's their wide receiver 1. Without him, they don't really have a lot of options, so they feel inclined to keep him. But what would that price be to potentially get the Saints to move off of this stance of, hey, we're not trading Chris Olave right now?
Yeah, I imagine a pretty high price. I mean, I think you're looking at like a second round pick and something else, right? Like we see the wide receiver, the disgruntled wide receiver trade in the NFL is a second and a fifth round pick. Stephon Diggs, like we see it with everybody.
Yeah.
But I don't think that Chris Olave is disgruntled. He's pretty happy here in New Orleans. He likes the environment. He likes the team. He likes his room. He likes the city, all those other things. But I would imagine that the price is a second round pick. And just to be super clear too, I don't think that we're talking second round pick value, right? Oh, 2 third-round picks is a second round pick, right? No, it's like second round pick or better is kind of what they're looking for. So I would expect it to be like really the last of the Saints traded a wide receiver away was what, I can't remember exactly what year it was, but it was 2 years into Brandon Cooks' contract when they traded him away for a first round pick after investing a first round pick in him. So I think that like that's kind of the way that, despite the way that the market has shifted, I think wide receivers were more like the market was higher for wide receivers at that time than it is now, with the impact of drafted receivers and stuff like that and how quickly these guys catch on to the game these days. But I would say probably a second round pick or higher is probably the place that the asking point for New Orleans, which is a high price.
Yeah, what's so fascinating about this from my vantage point with the Browns is just like that was a position I thought for sure they were going to address in the draft. They didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I actually asked Andrew Berry after the draft, like, is the wide receiver room still a work in progress? Like, is that something you still like you feel need to add? And he gave the very GM answer of, our entire roster is a work in progress, of course, but you got to get him on the record. So,
Right.
I still think though, like he has something up his sleeve. Like I have a hard time believing they're gonna go into next year with it being Jerry Jeudy, Cedric Tillman, who is still, I think, an unproven commodity at this point. There's been some signs, but you don't really know what you're getting there. And then like Deontay Johnson, who could just implode at any second and blow up the locker room. Like you just don't know what you're getting with him. So I think he still has something up his sleeve. But I also think what's interesting about this, because I actually thought, Ross, about doing an episode like early last week on, hey, would Chris Olave be available? This was right after Derek Carr obviously retired and all those different things. But I also then dove deeper into Chris Olave as a player. And I know I was familiar with Chris Olave already from his days at Ohio State, but just like how he's been used with the Saints. And I find somebody who's very similar stylistically to what Jerry Jeudy is, right? Like sort of this fast wide receiver who can take the top off of defense. And I sort of stopped myself from doing that show because I was like, I don't even know if this is a fit. And then this news came up that they at least inquired, and it's like, okay, maybe they think it's a fit. So I found that kind of interesting, but I don't know what your perspective is on that from a Browns fit standpoint, but it does feel like him and Jerry Jeudy do similar things.
Yeah, they do. They are very similar receivers. I would say that Jerry Jeudy is more effective after the catch. I would say that Chris Olave is more effective before the catch. That's kind of the way that I look at these guys. And so when you have young quarterbacks, like if you're eventually going to turn things, if the team's eventually going to turn things over to Shedeur Sanders, which I think they should do personally, then you probably want a guy that can separate, right? That can create bigger, larger, more open throwing windows, all those other things. And so I think that that's where the value of a Chris Olave could come in, is that he's a good receiver to pair. He's a good young receiver to pair with a young quarterback, because he can kind of erase a little bit of the inaccuracy stuff. And even with a guy like Shedeur, who is, kind of the elite part of his game is ball placement, anticipation, accuracy, all those other things. Like that's a good pairing for a guy that can get open, right? So I think maybe that's a little bit of where he might have his biggest contributions. He's not the biggest yards after catch receiver, although he has he had this thing in like the first couple of years when he was here, Spencer, to where he would kind of catch passes and almost immediately like go down. Like he was just kind of trying to avoid contact. And then towards the back half of the 2023 season, which was the second year, and then in through this 2024 season, he kind of got to a place where he was turning up field and looking for more yards and everything. And so you could see him kind of the mentality change there to where he was at least pushing upfield a little bit more. Still not a yards after catch threat, but that's a part of his game that he's working on. And I think maybe that's where maybe the two, though they're similar stylistically, could potentially complement one another.
That's some great perspective into what Chris Olave would bring to the table if this fanciful idea is even something that were to happen at some point. Ross, I appreciate your perspective on this. I look forward to coming up, elaborating a little bit more on the potential fit and where Jerry Jeudy would maybe have to play if Chris Olave did come here, and if this is even something that they should continue exploring. But Ross, I want to thank you for the time, man. Appreciate you stopping by with us on Locked On Browns.
Real pleasure, buddy. Thanks for having me.
Again, we'll talk about potential fit for Chris Olave, if there's a different wide receiver the Browns should be looking at, coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. Big thanks, major thanks to Ross Jackson for joining us on the show to give us some perspective on both those topics. The idea that the Browns maybe would inquire with the Saints about trying to trade one of these quarterbacks, or I guess the other way around, that the Saints would inquire about acquiring one of the that's a tongue twister, one of the Browns veteran quarterbacks, and the Chris Olave topic, which I do find fascinating, especially in light of the Albert Breer reporting that the Browns apparently had at least called the Saints at some point to ask about the availability of Chris Olave and maybe present them with a package that they would be willing to offer. And I do have questions about that fit, because it does, like, for me, for example, let me frame it to you this way. Last year, when the Browns were reportedly all in on trying to acquire Brandon Ayuk from the San Francisco 49ers, it made sense. Guy that can play in the slot, do a lot of different things. You put Jerry Jeudy outside and obviously at the time you had Amari Cooper, but he was going to be apparently part of that deal had it actually gone through or actually happened. But you would have put Jerry Jeudy on the outside, Brandon Ayuk as your slot guy, and you would have been able to just kind of like run the offense with those two guys as your frontline starters. And the idea of that was really intriguing to me. I love the thought process behind trying to trade for Brandon Ayuk. It made a lot of sense. And then he signed the contract. I know I talked early in the offseason about potentially him being available. I think what makes it hard right now is the contract situation there makes it hard for him to be traded right now. So I don't think that's on the table this offseason for the Browns or this summer for the Browns. So I understand why they would maybe make a call on somebody like Olave, but the fit is the thing I have questions about because of Jeudy and Olave having similar styles in terms of the way that they play the game, the things that they bring to the table, the skills and traits that they have. They're very, very similar in that way. But I like what Ross added, like the wrinkle of Olave's better before the catch in terms of like getting that separation that you need. Judy's better after the catch, and I think that played itself out last year. Jerry Jeudy showed immensely that he was talented enough to, after he makes a play, after he catches a pass, make guys miss and go take it for a touchdown. That's a huge part of his game, and we saw that firsthand here in Cleveland last year. So maybe that is the way that you would make it work. I also like what Ross had to say about, like, if you have a young quarterback, like a Shedeur Sanders potentially starting on this team, having somebody who can kind of grow with him in Chris Olave, a younger talent, would be huge, and you know he's going to be able to create some comfortability there because he can get that separation. He can do the things that you need him to do and the nuances of the position. But I guess if that was going to be the trade that they made and it somehow came together, I do think that would require, it would mean that Olave goes outside, and I think Jerry Jeudy goes to the slot. Because as you go back and look over the course of both of their careers, Olave, not really a slot guy. He's done it very infrequently. He's had a few instances. I forget his exact snap totals, but it's been like in the range of like 20 to 30 snaps a season in his first 3 years. I know last year that was skewed because he only played a couple games or a handful of games before he got the concussion and was done for the season. But like he's only done it in very small spurts. That doesn't fit his style. He'd go outside. I think Jeudy would be the one that you'd move into the slot. And so from that standpoint, yes, maybe you can make it work. But I still think that there's probably other receivers out there that would make more sense of that Brandon Ayuk ilk that the Browns would maybe be looking for or would explore to potentially add to that wide receiver room, which I do think is still a priority. That's the key thing here. Whether it's Olave, whether it's somebody else, and it sounds like, based on what Ross was saying, the Saints aren't inclined necessarily to move Olave right now. They are more, they're selling themselves on, hey, listen, we are trying to be competitive. Chris Olave makes us more competitive. He's a really talented player in this league. He's our wide receiver one. We don't want to, mess with that. We want him to be here for years to come. And so they're dug in on that right now, it sounds like, and that's fine. But I still think the Browns are going to pull the trigger on some sort of move for a wide receiver before the season starts. I think they have to. I just can't envision that you start the season with your quarterback room being, your wide receiver. I talk so much about the quarterbacks on this podcast. With your wide receiver room being Jerry Jeudy, Cedric Tillman, who still is proving some things. I'm not saying this is not a knock on Cedric Tillman, by the way. I think Cedric Tillman has a chance to be a good player. We just haven't seen it in its full capacity yet. We've seen spurts. We've seen moments. We've seen plays. He's only in year 3 of his career. Like, he has room to grow, and that's fine. I can accept that. but is he going to become like the true number two wide receiver? We don't have the answers to that. I just think you need more in that room. You can't, to me, bank on Deontay Johnson making it through training camp, let alone the entirety of a regular season, without producing some volatile situation where it's a ticking time bomb and he's going to end up saying something or doing something that gets him in trouble, and then his career's in jeopardy yet again. Like, I'm not banking on that. I know, like, I understand the upside of that move. It's a win-win situation for the Browns. He either hits and is comfortable and doesn't screw up this time because he knows that he's on his last legs or last life maybe in the NFL, and he stays on the straight and narrow and produces for you, because I think Deontay Johnson at the peak of his powers was a solid NFL wide receiver. Or you cut him and no one's the wiser because you owe him nothing. None of his contract is guaranteed. So I'm fine with them taking a chance on that. I just don't know that I'm banking on that being the wide receiver room, and that you're going to start the season with those three guys as the guys that you're tying yourself to at one of the most important positions in football. And I understand, I've been saying a lot about how the run game is going to be the staple. The run game is going to be the focal point. That's going to be the Browns' identity, their bread and butter, whatever phrase you want to use. I've been preaching that. But you still, in this league, win with wide receivers. And you still want wide receivers around, especially in a year where at some point you're going to be evaluating these young quarterbacks, these rookie quarterbacks. You want them to have the right assets, the right weapons around them to be able to get a full picture or a better picture of who they are as players, what they bring to the table, what they're able to do. So I can't possibly fathom where this is the wide receiver room that the Browns have right now is the exact same when they start the season. I think another move is coming. I think Andrew Berry has something up his sleeve. Albert Breer's reporting on this. The fact that there is a report that exists out there from somebody in the know, like Albert Breer, that the Browns have inquired about Olave, tells you right there that they are at least pursuing those types of things and those types of conversations. It might just take some time to sort of feel out when the right trade scenario might necessitate itself. And it might not be Olave for what it's worth. Like I said, I don't know if the fit's perfect. I think you can make it work the way Ross kind of laid it out. And the same with what I said, where you put Jerry Jeudy in the slot and put him outside. So it could work if you were to end up pulling the trigger on that. But it's also about the Browns' appetite to give up the draft capital to get there. It's about the Saints being willing to play ball to give up somebody like Olave. There's just a lot of factors that kind of come into play here. And we have to see how that would potentially sort itself out and all kind of come together. I don't know if Olave is the move. I don't even know if that deal is going to end up being on the table. But I do think the Browns at some point add a wide receiver via a trade before the season starts. And the fact that this report exists tells you that they probably feel similarly about the thought that they need to add to that room, and that Andrew Berry might have something up his sleeves later in the summer to make that happen. Another episode Down with Your Dog Pound. Thank you for joining me as always to talk about your favorite football team. We got plenty more to come this week, including OTAs starting up. We will be there in person as media members to witness the snaps for these quarterbacks and everything that they're doing. What am I looking for at OTAs this week from the quarterback position? How is the rep share going to look? All those types of conversations will be had, so make sure you hit that subscribe button and make Locked On Browns your first listen every single day. For your second listen, check out Locked On NFL Scouting, or you can keep it local. Check out Locked On Cavs or Locked On Guardians. Thank you for being an everydayer at the Locked On Podcast Network. I will talk to you again real soon, Cleveland. See ya.